B2B marketing is like a detective story, where uncovering the right strategy is similar to solving a complex case. It requires the correct information, teams, and tools to piece together the clues and reveal a successful marketing approach. Meet Jan Zwet, a very experienced marketing leader in the B2B SaaS space, as he shares insights to crack the case of driving real revenue by transforming traditional lead generation into effective, revenue-focused strategies. Coming up on today's episode, the evolution of B2B marketing, marketing's role in revenue generation, the dark funnel, and influencing non-measurable channels. Jan, I'm super excited to hear about your B2B insights and strategies. But firstly, you've seen significant changes in B2B marketing over the years. How have marketing strategies evolved, particularly in shifting from, say, focusing on lead volumes to driving real revenue?
Yeah, 100%. I think this all kind of goes back to what is it, like 2000, early 2005, 2010, when Marketo and Salesforce were kind of coming up into the landscape of helping out marketers and go-to-market teams in kind of scaling their business. And pretty much what they suggested would be anything lead created would be then nurtured into becoming an MQL. Those MQLs you would hand off to like an XDR department, sales development reps or business development reps. Then they could create an opportunity out of it, create a meeting out of it, and then that would ultimately be then turned into revenue. Now, this all looks like an assembly line where marketing hands over stuff to business development, hands over that stuff towards account executives. But in reality, it's not as simple as that. That kind of says that someone downloads a white paper somewhere and then ultimately actually buys 150K of software. I think the general idea is that the customer journey isn't that linear. It's not that easy. It's actually quite a complicated world. And over the last 15, 20 years, with all the technology, with all the changes in the world, with all the changes everywhere, I think ultimately what we have to start realizing is that probably over 80% of the customer journey takes place in areas that we can't even measure it. We can't even see it. So when you say ultimately more leads work towards diminishing effects, I've experienced this firsthand in multiple companies, because I used to work at like early Series B, Series C, Series D's, start and scale ups, where the marketing target would double year over year. So that means that year one, you would get like a target of 1,000 leads. Second year would be 2,000 leads. Then the year after would be 4,000 leads. And the year after, you would get a target of 8,000 leads. Now, the first year, I would harvest 1,000 leads. And those were leads that were probably pretty much in the realms of people that are very likely to buy because they're active on your website, they're active on events. Like they would come up to you and say, like, we're kind of interested in your tool. You've got this hot new thing. We're kind of curious to buy and kind of learn more. And but the second year, you have to harvest double that amount, and maybe even more. So that means that ultimately, in order to get paid, I would need to reach a certain limit. So I would be inclined to drive tactics and spend my budget on tactics that don't necessarily interact with people that are very likely to buy. So for example, I just always give this stupid example, like I would have my mother-in-law in there, I would have like the Swedish volleyball team in there. Those would be counting as a lead because they've interacted with your content and they've been driving engagement, and they would have a certain score as a lead, but those people will never, ever, ever turn into an actual customer. And the interesting thing is that, and as your requirements from the organization scale, the budget doesn't scale, and the people that you interact with doesn't scale as easily. So I think that's the tricky part in kind of demand generation go-to-market teams, where how do you then scale ultimately your efforts? I think a good thing in there to realize, and the thing to kind of understand, is that not every single lead is created equal. So if someone fills out a demo form on your website because they are really curious to see the piece of software in action, that's probably a lead that will be very likely to convert into an actual deal. But if someone just attended a webinar, doesn't necessarily mean that they're in market to buy the software. So those leads aren't created equal. Then you've got a lead maybe of someone that downloaded a white paper, or someone that fills out a random form on your website. doesn't necessarily mean that they're in market. So I would say, because of that nature, the more leads that you create, it will ultimately work for diminishing effects. Also, there's some a difference in kind of different tactics that you can generate leads from. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, there's not so much GDPR rulings. So out of a conference, you could easily get 3,500, 5,000, or maybe 10,000 leads generated from one single event. But that's just a list that you get from the organizers after the event has happened, and you can upload all these leads into your system. So let's, for the sake of the conversation, realize that we're now uploading 10,000 of leads. Now, the question I would argue is, like, if I'm going to ask my business development team to follow up on 10,000 leads, will they be having a good bunch of days afterwards? Will they be turning that into revenue to the extent that we actually want them to? I think not, because within that event, not everybody interacted with the presentation that you might give them. Not everybody visited you at the booth. Not everybody had an engaging conversation. Not everybody's in market. Maybe again, the Swedish volleyball team, my mother-in-law are at that event, and they might not even kind of be inclined to buy anything. So by design, what happens is that in traditional kind of organizations and go-to-market planning, you could calculate back from the amount of revenue that you require based on conversions on how many meetings you might need in order to get to a certain opportunity level, in order to reach a certain amount of ARR. And if you need this amount of meetings, then you need a certain amount of MQLs, and for that you need an amount of leads. That means that if you are planning your go-to-market motion in that sense, then that means that if you need to grow from 5 to 10 million ARR, then you probably need to go from 1,000 leads toward 10,000 leads. But in essence, what I'm saying is that if you calculate it back from the amount of leads, it doesn't necessarily scale in that sense. So something has to give. Also, I'd like to kind of give you a point of, like, in there, you need to kind of change your perspective. Like, what are we after? Leads, really? I don't know any CEO or CRO that actually cares about leads. Those guys care about revenue. They don't care about meetings. They don't care about MQLs, and they don't care about leads. So if it's interesting to have a go-to-market dynamic where actually the thing that we're after is revenue, but the thing that we talk about is leads. And this is kind of the arena that I've worked in the last couple of years to kind of understand that not every lead is created equal, and therefore, ultimately, it works for diminishing effects. It doesn't scale in that sense. It has a limit.
Following on from that, marketing has historically been seen as a cost center rather than a contributor to the business. What changes have you seen in how marketing's value is perceived and measured, and how have these changes influenced the strategies and tools used by marketers today?
There's a situation where I would go up to senior management and go and ask for a certain amount of budget, right? Let's say you're my CEO and I say, Ross, I need 50K for this campaign. And marketing back in the day was very much viewed as being a cost center and not so much contributing to the business. So that's where it reminded, that comment that you made remind me of, is that there was a lot of people out there that were being seen, like they were doing a tremendous job, but they were being seen as a cost center and not so much a contribution to the business. So that's where we created a lot of attribution software, Marketo, Salesforce, and made sure that we measure the leads and the MQLs and the conversions and then the impact that we had on the business. And I think for back in the day, it made a lot of sense, because for the first time, we can show what was actually working. Fast forward to today, I'm more curious to understand and to uncover what's not working. Because if we're generating 20,000 leads for diminishing effects, I would kind of care to know what channels aren't performing in order to or improve or just completely remove them from the budget at all. And that kind of reminds me of, like, look at it as marketing to being a leaky bucket. There's a whole bunch of stuff and tactics and budget that has to convert into kind of certain tactics, and those tactics kind of perform well in kind of some form of a mix. But I'm very curious to understand, where is it not performing? Very good example would be, there's a whole bunch of companies out there that sell content syndication services, that they deliver like $70 or $80 per lead. So that means that if you want to have 100, 150 leads, then you would know with your cost per lead what you're getting. It helps the vanity metrics of leads and maybe MQLs, but consider this, like those leads have not interacted with your brand. There's not been any form of understanding of what your company does. There's not really been any understanding of what problem the company solves for. So they might have interacted with your content. They might be delivered with an email address and GDPR compliant, but there's companies out there that buy 500, 600K a year on content syndication leads. They chuck them into nurture sequences, but because the people that experimented with your content never really connected with your brand, those leads will never see the light of day when it comes down to an opportunity. That means that hopefully maybe 0.5%, 1% of that budget might convert into an opportunity. And that means that I'd be very curious to kind of understand from revenue analytics instead of just lead analytics to kind of understand what in the entire cycle is actually generating your revenue. And it's interesting to see that there's more and more people out there that are more curious to understand what's not working in order to have a better go-to-market strategy and better aligned between marketing, sales, and BDRs in order to do the right things.
Well, Jan, as we wrap up today, how did the recent influx of investments and the need for comprehensive go-to-market plans impact traditional marketing, metrics, and strategies? And what shifts do you believe are necessary for companies to adapt effectively in this new environment?
Well, I think what happened is like in like early COVID days, like money was free. Like there were so many software advantages popping up. There were so many investments being done, and these investments required a go-to-market plan. And basically, the general kind of calculation that would have been made was on an Excel spreadsheet that goes, if our year-to-year projection on revenue growth would be this, then it means that we need to have this amount of meetings, this amount of MQLs, and this amount of leads. For that, a very normal kind of calculation will be made for saying, well, if this is the revenue projection, then a certain percentage of that would be sales and marketing costs. And out of that, here's your marketing budget. And based on that marketing budget, we need to have a certain ROI, and that ROI is measured in leads or MQLs. So ultimately, that's the thing that needs to change. So for example, if you dive into the different tactics, if you have like a content syndication, what I just talked about, if that has like a revenue conversion of like 0.5%, I don't think that's the right investment to make. If you look at like the complete SDR department, kind of calculate back on what their contribution is into actual revenue, you might want to kind of dive into kind of what's working and what isn't. If you look at the kind of the stuff that's not measurable and how that's working towards your brand, it becomes like a whole different arena. So I think what the trouble is, and what the thing that a lot of companies are currently solving for, is the general go-to-market planning, calculating top-down from revenue back to certain leads, and then giving those vanity metrics towards different teams. Because what they're doing is that they're giving those vanity metrics towards certain departments, saying, hey, marketing has to deliver certain leads and MQL numbers. SDR has to deliver a certain amount of meetings. Sales has to deliver a certain amount of ARR. But what you're actually doing, which is not intentional, but what you're actually doing is you're setting up a very siloed way of running your go-to-market team. And basically what you're doing, you're setting everybody up for failure, and you're driving conflict more than that you're supporting. So there's now more and more frameworks that kind of flip that measurement. And instead of looking at MQL numbers or lead, we're actually talking more about like, what's the sales velocity of the stuff that we're doing? What's the conversion from certain leads into actual revenue, instead of just looking at pipeline being created? And the thing that I love most is what's your actual customer acquisition cost? Because I'd love to see like a lot of impact from marketing, but I don't think marketing is only responsible for kind of getting revenue in. There's a ton of BDRs, SDRs, there's a ton of account executives, and there's a ton of supportive functions. There's even customer success out there supporting deals, and people in solutions consultancy to kind of help people bring them across the line. And I just personally think it's ridiculous to have a siloed mentality or like a siloed approach that the belief that there's individuals or departments responsible for a certain thing. I think everybody should be responsible for that entire customer journey, because everybody interacts with your customers at a certain point. And if you flip that view, and if you stay away from MQL metrics or opportunities or kind of all that, and we all share kind of a view of a customer-centric view that we all need to align on in order to get people in their buyer's journey from one step to the other, I think that will definitely help. And there's more and more companies that are thinking in that way and kind of shedding the old way of thinking of that linear model, because I think everybody's kind of feeling the grunt of and the grind of kind of harvesting MQLs that are just not going anywhere. I think that what really radically changed is that back in the day, like, money was free, so we could just kind of hire people at will. We could just like get like marketing to fund activities that would not yield, simply because it was already paid for in the plan. But I think now currently, like, the pressure is on. Like, there's a lot of people switching jobs. There's a lot of people kind of wanting to work for the cool companies and the successful companies. There's a lot of companies that now focus more on profitability instead of just growth. And if we're talking about, so this is also kind of what I've learned in my previous years. Like, what's your North Star? Is your North Star creating leads? Is your North Star kind of creating MQLs? Is it creating meetings? Is it creating that revenue? Maybe it's something else. Like, maybe it's shareholder value that you strive for. And by having that North Star will have a massive impact on how you design your go-to-market team, how you design the operating model, the different handshakes across teams, the way that you finance it, the way that you look at performance. So I think, to your question, yes, definitely after COVID, when the world was starting to return to what we kind of refer to as being normal, then I think what really happened is that a lot of people learned that the old way of working just doesn't fit anymore. And it's not so much of an evolution that we need today, but it's more of a complete transformation of our kind of go-to-market and way of designing our marketing teams as well.
Now you have the insights to uncover your marketing mysteries and solve the case of driving real revenue. And stay connected with the ever-brilliant Jan Zwet by following him on LinkedIn. And for more on driving business growth in the B2B sector, watch our interview with James Bridgman on how to forge successful partnerships that scale. Until next time, from me, Ross Webb, bye for now.